Hello, I am Alan Gerding. This is Designer Diary. Today, you want to play with a whole bunch of people around your gaming table. Maybe you invited an extra amount of players because you're so used to people canceling. You thought, surely if I overbook, I'll have just the right amount. Kind of like airlines and how they do their biz today. But unfortunately, everybody shows up. Maybe you're at some game convention and you forget to put a player cap when you say you're willing to run a game of Mothership. Now you find yourself with 12 players around your table. It's hard enough to run a game with just the typical 3 or 4 players. But 12? Oh my goodness, you've bit off more than you can chew. What are you going to do? How do you run so many players? Well, that's what we're discussing in today's episode of Designer Diary. How you run a tabletop role-playing game with more than your typical 5 players. I'm talking 6 players or more. And there's 5 main rules that I recommend that you use. The first rule of which is the most important. But before we get into that, make sure you check out TuesdayNightGames.com and you buy all of our shit today. Mothership, 2 Rooms and a Boom, That's Not Lemonade. Do it! It's the best way to support this channel and me, Alan Gerding, and my business partner Sean McCoy. But let's get into these 5 rules, the first and most important of which is don't! Do not run a game with more than 5 players. You shouldn't do this. Do not attempt running a game with so many. But why? Why, you may ask? Why can't I run a game with more players? Certainly, the rules can allow for it. The more the merrier. That's what I thought, right? No. What's to stop me from doing it? Well, me and my advice. First of all, it takes a very experienced dungeon master, GM, warden, guide, whatever the hell you call the person running the game. It takes a lot of experience to handle so many players. But even then, it's like running a classroom more than it is running a game. It's already so difficult, I can't mention that enough. This throws a whole bunch of monkey wrenches into your GMing style. Please, remember, your primary objective is to keep your players wanting more. Everyone wants fun, and you want to motivate them to come back again and again. But if you get greedy and try to run too many players at once, well, that session may go poorly, and then none of those players may ever want to come back. Oh my! So my recommendation is, instead, break these players into 2 separate groups. You have 12 players? No! You have 2 groups of 6 players. Oh, you have 6 players? No, you have 2 groups of 3, which, doing math, beep, 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 that means if you have 12 players, you can do 4 groups of 3 at separate times. Again, you should avoid running large groups at all costs. But with that being said, you've ignored my first rule, so let's move on to the second rule. You need a thorough mission briefing before every session of a large player group. What do I mean? Before you even attempt this, you need to make sure that everybody who's about to play is on the same page. So speaking of pages, we're gonna flop on over to this left page here. This is the many players briefing. This is what I believe you should say to all of your many players before you dive into a session. And not just your first session of many players, no, every ding dang time. We are here to create fun memories, but there are many of us. Thus, we all agree to the following ideals. Rule number 1, and the most important of which. This one is so important that the other rules can be considered simple subsets of the first rule. A, B, C. Always be courteous. Always be courteous to the players all around. Realize you should help your neighbors. There's going to be someone sitting to your left and someone sitting to your right. If they have questions or concerns, rather than stopping the entire play session, go ahead and help them. Be aware of everybody. You're not the only one at the table. When you sit down, you're no longer sitting down at a typical role-playing group that is more individualistic. No, with this many players, it's collectivistic. So be aware of everyone and know that you are part of a team, a gigantic, cohesive unit. Rule number 2, this may be controversial, so you can always ignore this, but I thoroughly recommend no distractions. I have accidentally run large player group sessions way too many times, and what can usually fly with just 3, 4, or 5 players, I've learned doesn't fly with many. That includes phones, snacks, drinks, and chit chat. Don't do it! And number 3, share the spotlight. Imagine you and your friends playing this game are nothing but players on the theater, performing a live story. And when someone is talking and performing action, that stage spotlight is on them. If you're speaking, that spotlight is on you. But you need to share this spotlight, because there is no singular protagonist, not even the Dungeon Master, maybe even arguably, especially not the Dungeon Master. Imagine the spotlight is very hot, sizzling hot. It cooks you, and it even causes cancer. Think of it more like hot potato than something to be coveted. With that in mind, you should also never steal the spotlight. Simply said, don't interrupt your fellow players. And I already mentioned this may be a classroom type environment, so if necessary, if you need the spotlight or someone's taking too much of it, raise your hand, only if needed. Number 4, very simple, listen! Listen to your Dungeon Master and your fellow players. Again, this plays into sharing the spotlight, and it also goes to rule number 1, always be courteous. Rule number 5, emote your frustration in healthy ways. Because this is going to be a large group, it's almost guaranteed that someone's going to get frustrated or someone's going to be frustrating. So practice your conflict resolution skills. Always keep in mind rule number 1, always be courteous. But how can you be frustrated in a courteous way? Use I statements, saying I feel. Don't just accuse someone of being a douchebag. Say, I feel very angry right now because of, and name the very specific reasons you're frustrated. This way, you're taking ownership and responsibility of your own feelings. This is always healthier than just blaming and labeling someone else. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing your I statements, please make sure you tell your host, your dungeon master, warden, whatever the fuck you call it. I don't know. And last but not least, if you still don't feel comfortable sharing with anybody at all, you can always step away. Remember, consent is important in all things, and the chances are really good. If you don't want to be there, you're not really serving the group dynamic, and sometimes we just need to take a breather and a break. Listen to yourself and step away if necessary. And now we are done with the 5 ideals of the player's briefing. Let's jump back to this page, all about running a large group at your table. Rule number 3, a lot of prep work. If you dare run a session with so many players, it better be a session you've run before, or at least have seen someone run before. We're talking handouts, NPC memorization, know all the locations. You should be a master of the adventure you're about to run. Ouchie, ouch, wow, wowee, wow. Number 4, avoid social loafing. The truth of the matter is, I'm a psychologist and I teach social psychology, and social loafing is this phenomenon where when people are in large groups, they take less personal responsibility. Simply said, they get lazy. And so there is this technique to avoid social loafing. It's known as the 3I, no I method. I, no I. The first I stands for interesting. Your sessions need to be meaningful and absolutely not boring. The second I stands for identify individual efforts. You see, there was research done on swimming relay teams. They found that if the time clock on the wall marked each swimmer's time instead of just the whole collective time for the relay, then swimmers swam faster. You want to see your own individual time. This means saying, "Great job, Nariel, you totally decapitated that goblin." Because of Stella's intellect check, you now understand where to go in the mystery. Make sure you call out your players' successes. The third I each member needs to feel that they're indispensable. This means that the mission should be impossible to solo. Specifically, create encounters that require many players. A boulder covers your portal. Attempt it with no fewer than 6. All of you roll strength checks. Last in avoiding social loafing is no I, meaning there's no I in team. This means that you should be playing with a group that already feels that they know each other. I strongly recommend you only use already established friend groups, or at least if you're playing with strangers, do everything you can to make them no longer strangers and work together as a cohesive unit. And finally, rule number 5, do not split the group. This is a good rule even in small groups, but you have many players and you let them split, you're in for a world of pain. But how? How do you prevent them from splitting the group? How do you do this? Perhaps the party is a chain gang, and literally all their ankles are shackled together. Maybe there's some magical spell that prevents them from walking away from each other, and if they do so, they could die, almost like exploding collars from the movie Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Or, one of my favorite techniques is actually breaking the fourth wall. Robin attempts to leave the room, separating the group from others, but she's unable to, almost as if she's playing a game and the dungeon master doesn't want her to do that because you're playing with a whole bunch of players. And there you have it. Very short, very simplified 5 rules on how to run your tabletop role-playing games with large groups. What do you think? Did I condense this too much? Should I make another video explaining social loafing? Is there something you feel that I really missed or something you really disagree with? Please let me know because I'm learning just like you're learning. So with that in mind, please share the shit out of this episode, subscribe or die, and I hope I see you next time here in Designer Diaries.